A few weeks ago, I made a video that was kind of controversial. It was called The End of React Router, where I was describing what the future of the most popular routing library for React looked like. Turns out I was very, very wrong. Like, way more wrong than I expected. Because React Router was not the thing that was going to die. And when you think about it, that kind of makes sense. React Router is used in like 6 out of 10 React applications, maybe even more now. It is the way that so many of the biggest React apps that have been built to this day have been built. And with React's promise of backwards compatibility and moving things forward constantly, kind of makes sense that React Router is here to stay. React Router is as dead as jQuery or Laravel is. Well, it's actually quite a bit less dead because there's some really fun things coming. But first, I need to show something else. Because the thing that died is not React Router. The thing that died is Remix. Crazy. I did not expect this in the slightest. I genuinely thought Remix was going to be here forever. And okay, again, kind of being intentionally misleading. React Router is the new version of Remix, but there are a lot of really exciting things coming in the future of Remix too. And in order to make sure we can talk about all this in depth, we need to go in. Thankfully, it's not just me here to talk about it. I'm actually lucky enough to have a bunch of the Remix core team here, which I did not expect to have so many of them showing up. But if I scroll a little bit, you'll see everybody from our friend Pedro here, who quickly pointed out that my video came out just a few days after they made the decision to nap Remix, which again, I think is a great decision. And we really need to go into why, because the way I'm seeing this right now, it almost feels like the Remix team chose to sacrifice their brand in order to push the whole React ecosystem forward, which is such a noble cause that I had to come out, even though, as you guys know, I'm not the biggest Remix fan. This is a very, very important move. Anyways, awesome. Even Ryan Florence, and as you guys know, we have a history. So for him and I to be aligned says a lot. And thankfully, he wrote an awesome blog post about all of this after revealing this at ReactConf. And I could watch the video, but honestly, I think this blog post is going to be even more useful. From Ryan Florence. Last week, I gave a talk about React Router and Remix at ReactConf, and we posted an announcement here. Now that the dust has settled, I wanted to provide some more insight into the decision announced there and answer some common questions. TLDR, for React Router V6 to V7 will be a non-breaking upgrade. The Vite plugin for Remix is coming to React Router in V7. This is very, very exciting. We'll talk a lot about Vite in a bit, don't worry. The Vite plugin simply makes existing React Router features more convenient to use, but it isn't required to use React Router v7. Again, very nice. That's all the backwards and forwards compatibility. They're thinking a lot about the past and the future here. In v7, we'll support both React 18 and React 19. If you know how different React 19 can be internally, you know how big of a deal that is. For Remix, what would have been Remix version 3 is now React Router version 7. If you didn't already know, a lot of Remix is built heavily on top of React Router, so this makes a ton of sense to take the features that they were building in as a Vite plugin and push them in the React Router direction. Remix version 2 to React Router version 7 will be a non-breaking upgrade. I want to see what that looks like, but I'm very excited about it. And Remix is coming back better than ever in a future release with an incremental adoption strategy enabled by these changes. This diagram, I think, clarifies things very well. Where React Router has been around for a while and been getting major versions forever now. And then Remix happened and was aligned with those React Router versions. But the big thing that changed here is that it now is matched in parity and is the same thing now as React Router for now. But by doing this, they've enabled themselves to create a happy path for all React Router users, while at the same time giving themselves the trajectory to push React Router and specifically push Remix way further than we can even imagine today. Super, super exciting. I love when changes like this that are big and scary and damaging to brands are done if they're done in the pursuit of the best thing for the ecosystem and the users. And I, again, as a person who is known to not be the biggest Remix fan, need to emphasize this point. This is one of the most noble sacrifices I've seen in modern open source. And for anyone to be mad about this sucks, genuinely, because the stuff this enables is crazy. We'll talk all about that in a minute. Back to what this affects for React Router and Remix. Here's what it affects for both. React Router version 7 comes with new features not in Remix or React Router today, including server components, server actions, static pre-rendering. Oh, that's such a huge change. Previously, the Remix team's suggestions for doing static rendering were to spin up your website by fetching it from your Remix server and just caching the HTML. Really nice that static pre-rendering is now built into the framework. And they even have type safety across the board. A lot of why some of the newer routers, specifically TanStack router, were initially created was in pursuit of better type safety, better behaviors around really dynamic applications, query params, stuff like that. It is really nice to see React Router catching up in those regards. Background. Remix became a wrapper. This is, again, a really bold statement. A little bit of quick history with Remix. At the time when it originally started, it was kind of a template for the right way to do React apps made by the creators of React Router. They did not like the current bundling story because, to be frank, the bundling story at the time was garbage. The existing solution was Webpack, and it kind of worked, but once you wanted to split your app into server and client, it became significantly harder to use. They decided to skip all of that in order to give a better experience and build something truly different, and they went all in on ESBuild really early, if I recall, before Vite even existed. And even when Vite did come out, they didn't support React initially, it was just a Vue thing. So it made a lot of sense for them to build heavily into ESBuild. The result was that most of Remix was a giant pile of things on top of ESBuild in order to make it possible to generate server-side behaviors and a good client-side experience. The result was not the easiest thing to maintain, and for a long time, I and others have been waiting for them to hopefully go in the direction of a more standard bundler. The thing I did not expect was for Pedro and Mark Dalgish to suddenly show up and just port everything over to Vite in like no time at all. I thought that would take months, if not years, and I think it took them like 2 months total, and they had a working demo build. And very soon after, Remix's recommended path was to use Vite. What I did not see coming was the move here to have that plugin effectively for Vite be used with React Router as well. Because what they realized over time is they ported more and more of those behaviors from their custom ESBuild setup over to Vite. So that a lot of those things worked as Vite plugins. And we're getting really good context from chat that I want to pull in here. We tried a year before we started Pedro and Mark's work, but Vite wasn't good enough yet. That checks out for me, honestly. I have had some rough back and forth with Vite in the past, especially like 2 to 3 years ago. One of my first blog posts was breaking down in depth how Vite's query param mangling was making it hard to do dev servers where you were hosting the backend somewhere else. Check out my blog if you're curious. I think it's been fixed, but every time I say that and then I go try to build things with it, it isn't, and I need to do my blog post again. So it's like Vite is a phenomenal piece of technology that enables so much, but like every piece of technology that has a lot of things that it enables has a lot of weird, hard to understand initially decisions, and a lot has changed over time. It is honestly really cool that so many meta frameworks are building around Vite now. It allows us to make one plugin or one tool that integrates there, and it just works with everything. And it's really cool to see that they've made this move too. I want to nerd out about the Vite stuff a little bit before we go back, so let's do that. Again, this is compared to their previous ESBuild stuff. They were still seeing 10 times faster HMR and 5 times faster HDR, which I don't think is the HDR that I'm thinking of. Hot data revalidation. Ooh. Really cool terminology and concept there. I dig that. We didn't switch to Vite for just the speed. Unlike traditional build tools, Vite is specifically designed for building frameworks. In fact, with Vite, Remix no longer is a compiler. Remix itself is just a Vite plugin. Yeah. Starting to see where all of this goes? Oh, a crazy number just dropped. 90 times faster HMR for shop.app, which is, if you guys aren't familiar, a really cool app that is by the Shopify team. This is one of those mobile apps that you use and you just assume it's native because it's so good. And then you talk to the people who built it, and it's actually a chaotic React Native app. So yeah, Shopify, believe it or not, is one of the best groups of web devs and mobile devs pushing React to its absolute limits. This checks out. There's a great tweet from the CEO of Shopify that was the classic like mining and the person giving up right at the end, right before the diamond. And that was his response to Airbnb giving up on React Native when they went all in on it, which is super cool. Apparently, there's a whole article about building shop.app with Remix too. Really good stuff. This is something I might even deep dive on in the future. Since Remix is just a Vite plugin now, that effectively means you can plug it into other things, and more importantly, that you can use other plugins alongside it, which is just so nice. You can just put like the React compiler or Tailwind or any other things here. You no longer need custom plugins that are Remix specific for things. You just use the Vite solution. And there's a lot of solutions in Vite. So this is really, really cool. Back to this moving to React Router though, because that's what we're all here for. At this point, Remix is just a Vite plugin that makes React Router more convenient to use and deploy. Outside of the plugin, Remix pretty much just re-exports React Router. Splitting the code, docs, issues, discussions, and development between 2 projects serves no technical purpose anymore. Instead, it adds artificial overhead for us and confusion for users. So we're moving the Vite plugin to React Router and we're calling it V7. But this is what we're here for. This is where that noble thing I was hinting at comes in. Because the more you go into server components, the more you realize like they are the future. This is how we're going to push web dev to the next era. It's such a powerful pattern. And it's so cool to see Remix pushing to get there, not just for Remix users, but for all React users. Because the harsh reality is that the average React dev does not use Next.js. The average React dev doesn't host their React code on the server right now. The average React dev is serving an HTML page that was created with something like Create React App years ago that they haven't touched in a long time, and they're building a gigantic application on top of it with hundreds of people contributing. Most React devs are working on these types of code bases that have been around forever, maintaining things. And those are a really, really rough sell for server components. If you were around when hooks happened, all you had to do was bump your major React version, which almost never had breaking changes, and then any component in your code base could just use hooks. Anyone could adopt hooks at your company. Even I, when I was a junior engineer at Twitch, was able to push hooks so fast that they couldn't get a lint rule in my way in time. And that helped me get much deeper in this stuff. That's not the case with server components. You can't just add them to your application because server components have to start at the root and be the way that you render and build your whole application. That said, if React Router finds a way for us to build this in that is much more seamless, and all you have to do is bump majors for React Router, all of a sudden, a lot of those companies can start using server components. And even the big code bases I used to work in, like Twitch, the path forward for Twitch to get server components, which, trust me, they absolutely need. It'll fix a ton of problems. The only realistic way I see them getting there is through this. And that's why I'm so excited. Because yes, RSC changes Remix, but Remix and React Router now have the opportunity to push React forward. And it is such a noble decision to make, to eat all the crap the community is going to give, to push through the confusion people are going to have, to make server components accessible to all is a very exciting thing. And when you see how they do it, you're going to be even more hyped. React 19 with RSC allows us to rethink assumptions about how to build React apps that cross the center of the stack. This is a really good framing of RSCs. When React first happened, MVC was the way that we built things. And React kind of came in and said, wait, is that a necessary abstraction? What if we abstract how we want to for our features and for our application? What if MVC isn't the right model for everything? What if I want my data and my UI together, or I don't sometimes? Let me decide where and how these boundaries exist. Server components are largely doing the same thing for the server-client relationship. This is a really good way of putting it. It's changed our assumptions about how we build apps that cross the center of the stack. It changes routing, bundling, data loading, revalidation, pending states, almost everything. After experimenting with RSC and running it in production with Hydrogen V1 for years now, we think we've designed a new API for Remix that's simpler and more powerful than ever. This is another thing people seem to forget a lot. The first framework that went all in on server components was not Next.js. We've kind of rewritten history to pretend that's the case. That's not the case, though. Hydrogen by Shopify was the first server component framework that went all in on it. They were not happy with the results because it was very, very early and sketchy at the time. We still had the .client.ts and .server.ts files, but their sacrifice allowed us to figure out what server components would look like longer term and make a much better proposal with the more async behaviors and the more confusing stuff with the use server. Separate tangent. Hydrogen V2 moved away from server components. Eventually, they were struggling with it enough and saw the opportunity with Remix to make that acquisition, which I think was a great call because it allowed the Remix team to grow and do way cooler things. And it's allowed Shopify to push Hydrogen in a different direction to merge it with Remix effectively. And all of these things get to improve significantly as a result. Internally, we've codenamed it Reverb. At an in-person preview with folks across Shopify, one of the engineers said quietly, "Wow, that's really beautiful. Interesting. You guys might need to give me an early preview too." We think it's beautiful too, but it's very different. We'll show it to you soon, but not yet. Show it to me, guys, please. I've been nice. I promise. I'll sign an NDA. I've signed a lot of those recently. The model was different enough that it seemed like we should name it something else to distinguish it from Remix today and to enable simpler incremental adoption by running both versions in parallel. But we love Remix, the brand, the community, the ethos. Yeah, the loss of the Remix brand, even temporarily, kind of sucks. It was the cooler name for sure. When Remix apps upgrade to React Router v7, this opens up space in your package JSON to run both the current and future remixes in parallel for a future incremental upgrade path. It also lets us keep the name. So while it may look like needless package shuffling, the technical fact is that Remix today is just a wrapper, and the shuffling enables the smoothest upgrade path in the future. Again, the clarity, the honesty, this is what I'm looking for in open source. This is done so proper. It makes me very, very happy to see that they're not going to pretend it's something it isn't, and they're not going to brand it as something it's not, when in reality, React Router is the core of all of this, and it's also one of the most important things in the React ecosystem. I'm so happy it's not being left behind and that things are going to keep going forward.
How do you move rendering to the server in React Router v7? Well, you select your code that you want to move to the server, and then you move it to the server, and then you come down here and you look at this products and you're like, what is that? Well, I guess it's some stuff that I can render. Oh, yep, like I told you, I'm running on an experimental React router and a beta of React, so I got to restart this thing. Oh my goodness, look at this.
This is so cool. This is one of my favorite demos of the magic of server components. If you didn't quite follow here, what was happening before is that this loader was returning some data that was fetched on the server, and then you would call the use loader data hook to get that data to then give it to JSX that would render on the client. It would also render on the server, so you'd get SSR and then hydration on the client. But the magic of server components is that you're effectively telling React, hey, you don't have to manage any of this with JavaScript on your side at all. This is just HTML effectively coming from the server. And what you saw here is just that simple. If the data that was being returned here was only needed for the render here, you don't need to return the data. You could just return the thing that you render. And you can mount other components in here like carousel. That's a client-side component. That's a component that needs to have interactions in JavaScript that loads. But all of that comes through the loader now, which is the magic here. This is why I'm really excited, because effectively we're allowing us to take JSX and treat it the same way we treat other data. Shout out to Jacob for making a lot of this stuff work, specifically the returning RSCs from loader stuff. And also a great question from Gabriel, how does child nesting work? Which is a really good question. To the Remix team, because I know you guys are here, if I was to pass a child to one of the things that I returned from there, what's the behavior there like? Can I pass a child in on client side, or do I have to determine which components from the server side? That's all just RSC. Product isn't a component, so you can't pass it anything. Okay. That's what I figured, is you really have to treat it like data and not as a component that can be passed to other things. Makes sense. Yeah. I do think it significantly simplifies the server component mindset. It isn't all of the functionality that we've seen from server components in other places, but I don't think we need every single bit of that functionality always. And I think a lot of the benefits are being shown here. If Next.js is the 100% all of the things you can get out of server components, this is like 70 to 80%, but it's significantly easier to jump in on, like comically so. That's why I'm excited here, because it lets you start having these wins without having to do all of the rethinking of your React app from scratch. I am excited for a future where you can use server components in more dynamic ways and compose them and do all the cool things that I'm used to doing in Next.js. But at the very least, this is a great start for route level data loading that is the loading of a component rather than just loading of data. I also think for people who are struggling to understand the server component model, this is a much, much more digestible way to do it. I think this makes things much easier to understand if you're trying to figure out what a server component is in the first place. It's returning JSX from the server instead of returning JSON from the server. This perfectly visualizes the magic of server components, and I think it will allow for a lot of people to start adopting these things. One more really good question that I'm pretty sure I know the answer to is, does this support suspense in streaming? They supported streaming before any of the other frameworks did, as far as I know. I would be surprised if they couldn't just do a server component async and then return that with the defer and have it just work. I'd be really surprised if that wasn't the case. Yeah, according to Ryan, it's all just RSC. Really exciting stuff. Arguments to the loader would come from the route. You wouldn't pass things to the loader because the loader is where the request starts from, and then the content loads, and then whatever else the loader does in defer comes through after if you wrap it with suspense. You can put the suspense in the loader or in the component. Really cool. So my last question for you, Ryan, would be if I had a separate file that had an async component that did all the data fetching and returned all of this, could I just return the JSX for that here? So if I had this, whatever the contents are here, where I have the product list, if I had a product list component, that was the classic simple server component demo, where I had an async function, I await the data, and then I just call the component here and return it. It is just RSC. Okay, cool. Sorry, Ryan. I'm happy to hear it is just RSC. It's hard. Async JSX is hard, okay? I never know what is or isn't implemented when people do it all sorts of different ways. I'm happy that we're on the same page here. I'll take the heat if it's what clarifies this for everybody else. It's my job to ask the dumb questions because I'm the dumb YouTuber. I'm really excited about this stuff though, like sincerely. I know you're not mad, Ryan. It's just we're playing into the character. I hope this helps clarify why I'm so excited about the future of Remix. Well, the future of React Router, and why my previous video of the end of React Router was not really the end of React Router. If anything, we're now in the rebirth of React Router, and the next era of it couldn't be more exciting to me. Let me know what you guys think in the comments, because I know I'm pretty hyped about it, but I want to make sure it's not just me. Anyways, peace nerds.